Before the stories begin, I would like to thank all of you for clicking on this video. Without the faithful fans, we as creators could not do this. I truly hope you enjoyed the upcoming stories. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for future stories to come. The night was quiet, the air heavy with stillness as Jake stepped out of the gas station. Working the night shift was never easy, especially on a desolate road like this, where the only company was the occasional passing car and the glow of the neon sign. Leaning against the side of the building, he lit a cigarette. Suddenly, a sense of unease washed over him. He always hated the dark. Ever since he was a kid, he struggled with it. His parents tried to comfort him when he was a child, with no success. He knew there was nothing to fear, yet it still made him feel vulnerable. Jake shook off the uneasy feeling and focused on his duties. He had bills to pay and a family to support, and the night shift was the only work he could find in this small town. He stocked the shelves of previously purchased chips, Band-Aids, tampons, Slim Jims, and over-the-counter painkillers. After that, he went to the back, grabbed the mop bucket, and cleaned the floors. He cleaned the windows and took out the trash inside and out. Once he was done, he glanced at the clock on the wall, the minutes ticking by with agonizing slowness. It was nearing midnight, the witching hour, when the veil between the living and the dead was said to be at its thinnest. He had always been skeptical of the paranormal, dismissing ghost stories as nothing more than superstition. But as he stood alone in the empty gas station, the feeling of unease returned. Just then, a car pulled into the gas station, the twin beams from the headlights cutting through the night. Jake straightened up, plastering a smile on his face as he approached the vehicle. "Evening, folks," he said, his voice echoing in the silence. "What can I do for you?" The car was empty, its doors swinging open as if by some unseen force. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he peered inside. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling with uncertainty. But there was no response, only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Jake hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the pump. Something didn't feel right about this, something out of place and unnatural. Did the passengers of the vehicle simply get out before he approached the car? Were there multiple people in the car? Was it a lone man? A woman? A teenager that took their parents' car for a midnight drive on a desolate road and had to stop at the only gas station around for miles to refill the vehicle? All of these thoughts flashed in Jake's mind, like old film running through a projector. With a nervous gulp, Jake reached for the nozzle and began to fill the car's tank. But as he worked, a sense that he was not alone began gnawing at him. Suddenly, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the pavement. Panic shot through Jake as he glanced around. It was as if the very air was alive with whispers of the dead, their voices carried on in the wind. Just then, a figure appeared in the distance. Jake's blood ran cold as he realized it wasn't human, not flesh and blood like him. It was something else entirely, something insidious. He stumbled back, his pulse quickening with fear. "Who's there?" he called out. But the figure said nothing, only watching from the shadows, with eyes that seemed to pierce straight through Jake's soul. Terror clawed at his throat as he backed away, his mind racing. With a burst of adrenaline, Jake turned and ran, his feet pounding against the pavement as he fled into the gas station. Inside, he collapsed against the counter, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The night had turned from a mundane shift into a nightmare, a descent into darkness that threatened to consume him. Jake caught his breath and glanced out the window. He realized that the figure and the car were gone. They simply vanished into the night. Jake breathed a sigh of relief. It was nearing dawn, and he had to get the coffee ready for potential customers before his shift was over. He would never forget this encounter, the feeling of dread that had gripped him in its icy embrace. From that night on, Jake never looked at the paranormal the same. He knew that there were things in this world beyond his understanding, things that lurked in other realms and defied explanation. He watched the sun rise over the horizon, casting its golden light across the empty road. He had glimpsed into a realm beyond his comprehension. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying thought of all. The neon lights of the arcade flickered to life as Mike stepped through the doors, the sound of electronic music filling the air. Working the night shift as a security guard was always an interesting experience, but there was something special about the arcade at night. The flashing lights, the whirring of the machines, it all added to the sense of excitement and anticipation. Mike made his rounds, checking each corner of the arcade for any signs of trouble. It was a quiet night so far, the only sounds the hum of the machines and the occasional laughter of late-night patrons. As he patrolled the aisles, Mike couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia wash over him. He remembered coming to this arcade as a kid, spending hours playing his favorite games and chasing high scores. Now, as an adult, he found himself back in the same place, albeit in a different capacity. But nostalgia soon gave way to boredom as the hours dragged on. Mike checked his watch, the minutes dragging by. He had always been a night owl, but there was something about the solitude of the arcade at night that made time feel like it stood still. Just as he was about to settle into his routine, a noise caught Mike's attention. It was faint at first, barely perceptible over the din of the arcade. But as he listened closer, he realized it was coming from one of the back rooms. Curiosity piqued, Mike made his way towards the source of the noise, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. As he reached the door to the back room, he paused, his hand hovering over the handle. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, illuminated only by the glow of a single arcade machine in the corner. Mike approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. And then he saw it. A figure hunched over the machine, its back to him as it worked furiously at the controls. Mike's heart skipped a beat as he realized what was happening. Someone was trying to break into the machine, to steal its precious contents under the cover of darkness. "Hey," Mike called out, his voice echoing in the empty room. The figure froze, its movements halting as it turned to face him. Mike's breath caught in his throat as he stared into the eyes of the intruder. They were cold and calculating, devoid of any remorse or fear. Without a word, the intruder lunged forward, a knife glinting in the dim light. Mike reacted on instinct, ducking out of the way just in time as the blade sliced through the air where he had been standing moments before. Adrenaline surged through Mike's veins as he fought back, his training kicking in as he grappled with the intruder. They wrestled on the floor, the sounds of their struggle echoing through the empty arcade. But just as Mike gained the upper hand, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Mike's heart pounded in his chest as he groped blindly in the dark, searching for any sign of his attacker. And then, just as suddenly as it had gone out, the lights flickered back to life, illuminating the room once more. But the intruder was gone, vanished into thin air. Shaken but determined, Mike radioed for backup and began to search the arcade, his senses on high alert. He combed through every corner, every nook and cranny, but there was no sign of the intruder. As the sun began to rise, Mike couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him. The night had been harrowing, but he had emerged from it unscathed, a testament to his training and resolve. And as he stepped out into the dawn, the neon lights of the arcade fading into the daylight, Mike knew that he would never forget the events of that night. It had been a trial by fire, a test of his courage and determination in the face of danger. But as he walked away from the arcade, his footsteps echoing in the empty streets, Mike couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He was a security guard, a guardian of the night, and he would do whatever it took to keep the people he swore to protect safe from harm. It was a busy Friday night at the bustling sushi restaurant, and Emma found herself caught in the whirlwind of chaos. As a waitress, she was used to dealing with demanding customers, but tonight seemed to be testing her patience more than usual. The evening started off smoothly enough, with Emma gracefully weaving between tables, taking orders and delivering plates of sushi with a practiced ease. But as the night wore on, a group of unruly customers at one of the tables began to cause trouble. They were loud and boisterous, their laughter echoing through the restaurant as they drank more and more sake. Emma tried her best to ignore them, focusing instead on her other tables, but their antics were impossible to ignore. They shouted and gestured wildly, demanding more drinks and complaining loudly when their orders took longer than expected. Emma gritted her teeth and plastered a smile on her face, determined to keep her composure despite the chaos unfolding around her. But then, things took a turn for the worse. One of the customers knocked over a glass of water, sending it cascading across the table and onto the floor. Another began to argue loudly with a fellow diner, their voices rising in anger. Emma rushed over, her heart pounding with adrenaline as she tried to defuse the situation. She apologized profusely to the other diners, offering to clean up the mess and make amends for the disruption. But the unruly customers were having none of it. They continued to shout and curse, their behavior escalating with each passing moment. Emma felt a knot form in her stomach as she struggled to maintain control of the situation. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, the restaurant manager stepped in. He was a tall, imposing figure with a no-nonsense attitude, and his presence seemed to have an immediate effect on the unruly customers. With a few stern words and a pointed glare, he managed to calm them down and get them to leave the restaurant peacefully. Emma let out a sigh of relief as she watched them go, grateful for the manager's intervention. As the night drew to a close and the last of the customers filed out of the restaurant, Emma took a moment to catch her breath. It had been a challenging evening, but she had managed to weather the storm with grace and professionalism. She knew that working in the service industry meant dealing with difficult customers from time to time, but she also knew that she had the skills and the resilience to handle whatever came her way. And as she wiped down the tables and prepared to close up for the night, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in her ability to rise to the occasion, even in the face of adversity.